By the time Layla saw the island, the sun was a dull copper coin over the Aegean. The ferry's engines hummed under her feet, and the wind smelled of diesel, salt, and wet rope. Ahead, Castro rose from the water, a ring of cliffs, a scatter of white houses, and the ruins of a fortress on the ridge like a cracked black crown. "You sure this is a good place for solo hiking?" her brother had asked, back in Thessaloniki. "It's October," she'd said. "There'll be locals, not tourists. I just need quiet." She'd meant, I need 3 days without monitors screaming, family members grabbing my sleeve, and hearts stopping under my hands. 3 days without having to tell anyone their husband, wife, child was gone. Now, as the island drew nearer and the houses on the hillside hunched close together, she wasn't so sure. The lights along the tiny quay blinked on, harsh, fluorescent, more clinic than postcard. Her phone showed no service. Castro had been described on travel blogs as unspoiled, which usually meant inconvenient. That had appealed to her. Unspoiled also meant fewer people to watch her, while she tried to remember how to breathe like someone who wasn't always listening for alarms. "You picked Castro," her attending had said when she'd mentioned it in passing. Papadopoulos was an old cardiologist with a nicotine rasp and a mind like a filing cabinet. "That's where they drowned that cult leader, back in the junta." "Drowned?" she'd asked, thinking he was joking. "In the cistern under the fortress," he'd said, lighting another cigarette in the call room. "They said he sacrificed children to Hecate. It was probably hysteria. Those years, everyone saw devils and traitors. Greece was full of stories like that, half history, half superstition, garnished with gods. Her grandmother had frightened her with Lamia and Mormalikia, child-stealing spirits invoked to keep kids in line. Later, Layla had found the mythological footnotes, Hecate at crossroads, ghost processions under a dark moon, and watched most of it collapse under scrutiny into psychology, politics, fear. Still, when the ferry bumped the concrete quay and the few passengers shuffled off, she thought of drowned men in black water and had to swallow before she stepped onto the pier. The port was hardly more than a strip of concrete, a cafe with plastic chairs stacked against the wall, and a handful of fishing boats bobbing in the deepening blue. A tall man in a navy sweater and an old army jacket waited beside a battered pickup, holding a piece of cardboard that said Layla Marco. She walked over, pushing her hair out of her face. "Callispera! Callispera!" His English, when he switched to it, was careful and slightly formal. "You are from the hostel?" "Yes." "Layla. I am Nikos." He took her backpack before she could protest and threw it into the pickup's bed. "Come." They drove up a narrow road that clung to the hillside. The village rose above them, white cubes stacked on stone, blue doors shut tight. The fortress loomed higher still, a jagged outline against the last smear of orange sky. As they took a curve, Layla glanced toward the cliff and thought she saw a dark oval cut into the rock below the fortress, a hole like a mouth. When she blinked and looked again, it was gone. "You came alone?" Nikos asked, eyes on the road. "Yes. Not many visitors now. Season finished. Only the people of Castro." His tone was flat, not welcoming, not hostile. "That's what I wanted," she said. "Peace and quiet." "The island is quiet in winter," he said. "Very quiet." They passed a tiny chapel, a closed mini-market, a row of cats staring from a low wall like a committee. Roadside shrines stood on metal poles, small blue boxes with icons and candles inside. One of them, half rusted, held the Virgin Mary and, beside her, a crude triple-bodied figure with dogs painted at its feet, the colors faded to ghosts. Layla frowned. "Is that Hecate?" Nikos followed her gaze. "Hecate," he said, with the old rough breath on the first syllable. Old things live a long time on islands. They sit beside the new things. The Madonna doesn't complain." He gave a brief smile that might have been a joke, might have been a test, then swung the truck into a steep lane. The hostel was a converted stone house near the top of the village, close to where the buildings thinned and scrub began. Inside, it was simple and cool. Whitewashed walls, tiled floors, iron bed frames. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and dust. "You are the only guest," Nico said, dropping her backpack by a narrow room with a small window. "If you need something, my house is below. The one with the fig tree. I'm sure I'll be fine." He didn't move away immediately. "You came to hike?" "Yes. The trail up to the fortress, along the ridge. Maybe down to the other side if there's a path." "There are old paths," he said. "Follow the red marks. Go in the day." He paused. "Do not be on the ridge after dark." "Because of the cliffs?" she asked, thinking of loose rock, unmarked drops. He considered. "Because of the wind." "The melt-emmy?" "It is not melt-emmy season." His gaze flicked to the window, where the sky had shifted to violet and the first stars were punching through. "Sometimes at night the wind changes. It upsets people. You know animos. Wind. And mania?" She managed a small, tired smile. "I'm a doctor. I know mania." "Good." He nodded once, as if that confirmed some private hypothesis. "Then you understand. Kalanicta, Kyria Marco." "Layla," she said, but he was already in the hall, footsteps fading. After he left, the silence in the hostel expanded until she could hear her own pulse in her ears. She found the tiny kitchenette, gas stove, dented kettle, jar of instant coffee, and made herself another cup, then took it out onto the terrace. The sea was a dark sheet below, broken by 3 or 4 moving pinpricks of light where fishing boats drifted. Above, the fortress was a darker block against the stars. The wind slid over the island in steady strokes, cool fingers on her face, carrying time, sea salt, and a faint metallic tang she couldn't place. Ancient doctors had blamed certain winds for madness, she remembered. Anemoi that carried fevers or melancholy. Hecate, goddess of crossroads and liminal spaces, of dogs and ghosts and sudden frenzies, had her own weather in some texts. The old stories had a way of reappearing in psychiatric textbooks as case studies with different names. "It's air pressure and suggestion," she said quietly, more to convince herself than anything. "That's all." She went to bed early, body heavy with travel and months of accumulated fatigue. The mattress was thin but clean, the sheet cool on her skin. Outside, the wind picked up, searching the corners of the house, making the wooden shutters creak rhythmically. Sometime in the night she dreamed she was underground. Her phone's flashlight beam shook over sweating stone walls and low arches. Niches lined the corridor, each holding a statue. Some were familiar: Athena, Apollo, a chipped Hermes. Others had smooth, blank faces, no eyes, no mouths, just polished stone where features should have been. She walked along the row, and the air grew wetter, heavier, smelling of old water and rust. From somewhere far below came the slow drip of liquid and a sound like distant breathing. As she reached the last niche, the faceless statue leaned forward in a movement so small she almost missed it. 3 voices whispered her name at once, her grandmother's, Papadopoulos, and a third she didn't know. "Layla! Layla! Down!" She woke sitting bolt upright, heart hammering in her throat, the sheet twisted tight around her legs. The room was dark except for a thin blade of light through the shutter crack, cast by a street lamp outside. The wind was howling around the hostel, higher and sharper than before. It slipped through gaps in the wood with a keening noise that was almost like animals whining, or words she was just failing to understand. "It's just air," she told herself, pressing the heel of her hand against her sternum like she'd seen panic patients do. The wind pressed its fingers against the shutters again, testing the latch, looking for a way in. Morning made everything look flatter, less charged. The sky was a clear, hard blue, the village bright, its white cubes stacked neatly on the slope. Only the fortress, black on the ridge, seemed to hold on to the night. Layla drank bitter coffee, ate a dry biscuit from her backpack, and unfolded the map Nikos had left for her. A red line showed the trail up to the fortress, then along the island's spine. Below the northern wall someone had circled a spot and written, in cramped Greek, Paleo Freer, Old Well. She shoved the map into her day pack, laced her boots, and stepped out into streets that already smelled of sun on stone. Old women in black sat outside their doors on low chairs, fingers working beans or knitting, eyes sharp and unembarrassed as they followed the stranger walking past. Cats slunk between flower pots, tails flicking. "Calamara," Layla said. Most gave a nod. One woman, with knife-sharp cheekbones and grey hair pulled into a tight knot, paused in shelling beans to look Layla up and down. "You're the doctor," she said in Greek. "From Thessaloniki," Layla answered. Small places always knew too much too fast. "I'm here to hike. On islands, nothing is just anything," the woman said. Her gaze moved past Layla to the ridge. "You'll go up." "Yes. The fortress path. Be back before the sun disappears." It came out as an order. "Because of the cliffs?" Layla asked. "Or the famous wind?" The woman pointed with her chin to a small three-way junction. A roadside shrine leaned there on a rusted pole. Its blue paint was peeling, the glass cloudy. Inside, a cheap postcard of the Virgin was taped to the back wall. Beside it stood a crude, three-bodied figure with tiny dogs at its base. The paint had flaked away in patches, leaving white scars. "Hecate," Layla said before she could stop herself. The old woman's eyebrows twitched. "You know her name. From stories. And from footnotes in classical literature, but she didn't bother adding that. In stories, the dead walk where three roads meet," the woman said. "She opens the way. We give her food so she doesn't take what we need." At the base of the shrine, someone had left bread crusts, a few olives, and what looked suspiciously like chicken feet. A thin dog crept close, sniffed, and backed away whining. "You still believe that?" Layla asked, trying to make it sound neutral and failing. The woman shrugged. "You have your hospital rituals. We have ours. It costs little." Her eyes sharpened. "Walk, doctor. But remember, when the wind turns, even a straight path goes crooked." Layla thanked her and headed uphill, annoyed at the way the words lodged behind her ribs. The path to the fortress was steep but clear, cut through scrub and wild thyme. As she climbed, the bay fell away, the porch shrinking to a smear of concrete and boats. The wind pushed at her shoulder, steady and insistent, as if hurrying her along. Up close, the fortress was less romantic ruin and more broken structure. Walls missing teeth, rusted railings, tourist signs bleached almost illegible. She wandered through shattered courtyards and crumbling bastions until she found a narrow stairway leading down, half blocked by a metal barrier that had been dragged aside just enough to let a person squeeze through. "This is how people sue municipalities," she muttered, then slipped past and descended. The temperature dropped with each step. The sound of the wind faded until there was only the scrape of her boots and the echo of her own breathing. At the bottom, she stepped into a rectangular chamber cut under the fortress, supported by thick stone pillars. The air was cool, heavy, faintly damp. In the middle of the floor, a round shaft a couple of meters across yawned in the rock. An iron grate covered it, orange with rust but still solid. Layla walked up to it and peered down. Blackness. When she dropped a small stone through the bars, she heard, after a long pause, a soft splash. Rainwater, most likely. Old storage. Maybe linked to underground channels. An entirely practical feature dressed up as a mythic mouth. On a flat stone near the shaft, puddles of hardened wax lay in layers, white and yellow. Someone had drawn 3 joined circles on one of the pillars with black marker. 3 moons, 3 eyes, Hecate's sign, or just some bored teenager's occult doodle. The lines were still glossy. A faint breath of cold air rose from the shaft and stroked her face. It was just convection, she told herself. Cool air falling, warm air rising, basic physics. Her skin still crawled. A foot scraped on stone behind her. Layla spun around so fast she almost slipped. An old man stood halfway down the stairs, framed by the rectangle of daylight. As her eyes adjusted, she saw black trousers, a black shirt, long white hair tied back at his neck. A string of wooden komboloi beads clicked gently in his hand. "You shouldn't be alone down here," he said in Greek. His voice was dry, edged with that island sing-song. "People fall." "I saw it on the map," Layla said. "I thought it was part of the trail." He came down the last few steps with unhurried care and stopped near the grate, looking down. Up close, his eyes were very pale, the color washed out, but they fixed on her without wandering. "The stone is slippery," he said. "Wet. Rotten. I'll be careful. It's not the stone that breaks people." He tapped his temple lightly with one knuckle. "Here. Down here the mind hears too well. The old noise climbs back up." "Echoes," Layla said, trying for dry. "Sound bouncing off rock. Echoes." He rolled the word in his mouth like something he didn't quite trust. "And things we wanted to forget. Names. Oaths. Children." His gaze didn't move from the grate. "You know about the man they drowned here." "My boss mentioned him," she said. "He said it was hysteria. Politics." "Hysteria is a pretty cloth to put over a body," the old man said. "They said he promised the island's children to Hecate. They said he whispered into this hole at night. Maybe he was mad. Maybe they were. The soldiers needed someone to throw down." "Do you think he did those things?" Layla asked. The old man clicked his beads, thinking. "I think when people are scared and someone says, 'The goddess wants blood,' they will find blood." He shrugged. "The night they pushed him in, the wind tore at the houses. They said those were her dogs, howling because they lost their master." Layla swallowed. "I believe in arrhythmias and low oxygen," she said. "In how fear spreads. Not in goddesses with dogs." He gave a small, genuine smile. "Good. Hold on to that when you hear strange things. Now you should go back up. The light doesn't last." She climbed, hand brushing the damp wall. When the outside air hit her at the top, warm and bright, her legs felt briefly unreal, as if they'd misjudged the distance. She stood there breathing until the world settled. The ridge trail beyond the fortress followed the island's spine, giving her sea on both sides and a sense of walking a narrow back between blue voids. For hours she moved with the wind in her ears. In some dips in the rock the air stilled all at once, and sound seemed to flatten. No wind, no birds, no surf, only the crunch of her boots. Once, in one of those pockets, she clearly heard footsteps behind her, perfectly matched to hers. She stopped. The other steps stopped too. She turned. The path behind her was empty, scrub trembling slightly from the heat. "Echo," she muttered, and made herself walk on. By late afternoon she came back down toward the village, legs pleasantly heavy, face tight with salt. The white houses expanded to meet her, alleys opening and closing like a maze. As she rounded the last corner to the hostel, she saw it. Something sat neatly on her doorstep. It was a shallow clay dish, old and chipped. On it lay 3 chicken heads, beaks open as if mid-scream, necks raw and dark. A ring of salt circled them. Flies had already found the eyes. For a moment she just stood there, her brain refusing to move, the metallic smell punching straight into her stomach. Then anger came, hot and clean. Someone thought this was funny. The city doctor, the stories about Hecate, the little shrine at the crossroads. Put some horror movie prop on her step and watch how she reacted. She went inside, grabbed a plastic bag from the kitchen, came back out and, holding her breath, tipped the dish's contents into it without looking too closely. The bodies clacked against the terracotta. She tied the bag tight, carried it down to the municipal bins by the port, and threw it in with more force than necessary. At the public tap, she scrubbed her hands until the skin went red. When she straightened, water dripping from her fingers, the sharp-faced old woman from that morning was watching from a doorway, arms folded. "That wasn't wise," the woman said. "Leaving severed chicken heads on someone's doorstep?" Layla snapped. "No, it wasn't." The woman shook her head once, throwing away what was left for her. "It was rotting. Everything we give them rots," the woman said. "That doesn't mean we put it with the garbage." She looked up at the sky, where a thin smear of fast-moving cloud had appeared low over the sea. "The wind will turn tonight. Lock your door, doctor." Layla wanted to say something cutting, but the edge had gone out of her. "It's already locked," she muttered, which wasn't true yet, and walked back up the hill. At the hostel, she turned the key twice. By evening, the air in the little room felt heavier, as if the island were holding its breath again. When the first new gust hit the shutters, it shook them harder than the night before and carried a smell she knew too well from the hospital. Wet stone, disinfectant, and underneath it the faint, stubborn trace of iron that no amount of cleaning ever quite erased. The wind woke her before midnight. Not just the noise of it, though that was bad enough, a rising, uneven howl that chased itself around the hostel walls, but the pressure of it, like something leaning on the building from all sides at once. Layla lay on her back, eyes open in the dark, listening. The shutters rattled in frantic bursts. Somewhere a loose tile clapped in irregular rhythm. Now and then the wind's voice climbed into a pitch that wasn't quite a whistle, wasn't quite a scream. "You know what this is," she told herself. "Barometric changes, pressure in the ears, sympathetic nervous system overreacting. You've explained it to patients in emergency who walked in convinced they were dying because of the fen wind." A sudden thump vibrated through the wall behind her head. She jerked upright. Another thump, closer to a bang this time, from the direction of the front door. Then a faint scraping, like something hard dragged over stone. She swung her legs out of bed, heart rate spiking. The room tilted briefly, then steadied. She fumbled for her phone, used the cold light of the screen to find the little torch she'd thrown into her bag. The corridor outside her room was a narrow tunnel of shadow. The wind made it sound as if the whole hostel were breathing fast. She padded down the tiles in bare feet, torch beam bouncing off whitewashed walls. At the front door she paused, listening. The scraping had stopped. The only sound was the wind clawing at the shutters and the faint creak of hanging keys. "Hello," she called in Greek, feeling foolish. "Nikos." Nothing. She checked the lock. It was still turned. She slid back the small metal latch on the peephole and looked out. The terrace was empty. The night beyond it was a moving darkness full of fast-running cloud and blowing dust. She almost closed the peephole before she noticed the shrine. In the triangle of road where the lane from the hostel met the main path to the village, someone had set up another tiny blue box on a pole, almost identical to the one lower down. She was sure it hadn't been there that afternoon. Its candle was lit, flames snapping sideways in the gusts, but not quite going out. A figure stood in front of it, back to her, long dark coat whipping around spindly legs. They seemed unnaturally straight, almost rigid, as if the wind had no effect on their balance. The person bent, placed something at the base of the shrine, and straightened again. "Hey!" Layla called, the word muffled by the door. "Excuse me." The figure's head turned a fraction, as if they'd heard something far away. She saw, just for a second, a pale profile, hair plastered to the skull, a thin jaw. Then the figure stepped sideways and was gone, swallowed by the knot of alleys. Wind, poor visibility, distance. Someone doing exactly what the old woman said, feeding the crossroads. Nothing supernatural about any of it. Layla left the peephole, went back to bed, and lay awake for a long time listening to the wind do its best impression of a pack of dogs circling something they wanted but couldn't quite reach. She woke late, grey light leaking around the shutters. Her head felt full of wool. The wind had eased but not stopped. It prowled now instead of attacking. Over coffee she debated whether to say anything to Nikos. Severed chicken heads, new shrines, strangers at crossroads in the middle of the night. It was none of her business, really. Island people had island ways. She had come for hiking, not to police folk rituals. Still, when she saw Nikos outside his house, pruning a fig tree with quick, sure snips, the words came out of her before she'd fully decided. "Someone left an offering on my doorstep yesterday," she said in Greek. 3 chicken heads. And there was a person at the shrine at night. She trailed off, suddenly aware of how it sounded. Nikos lowered the secateur and studied her. "You threw the offering away," he said. "There was no question in it." "Yes. It was disgusting." His jaw shifted. "That was not for you. That was for tradition." "Whose tradition?" she asked. "Because I didn't ask for dead animals outside my room." He looked toward the ridge, where the fortress sat under a low lid of cloud. "We have people here who still like to play with old things," he said. "Words. Symbols. They think they can bargain with them. They think if they give enough, nothing will be taken." "Taken how?" He hesitated. "There was a girl years ago," he said at last. "Anna. 6 years old. She went missing one night. Her mother said she followed the dogs out. No one ever found her. Some people said the old god took her. Some people said other things." He cut a twig cleanly in two. "Soon after, someone started leaving offerings on thresholds. Always 3. Always with salt." "Did anyone call the police?" "The police came from the bigger island," he said. "They searched. They took statements. They shrugged. 2 years later we were a headline for a day. Island where children vanish, cults of Hecate. Then nothing." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "The old women say if they keep feeding the crossroads, there will be no more honors." "And you?" she asked. "I say the wind makes people see what they expect," he said. "I say this island remembers too much and forgets the wrong things. Be careful where you walk, Kyria. Layla." Later, restless, she walked down to the crossroads shrine. The offerings at its base were fresh, bread not yet completely stale, olives still glossy. Someone had added 3 small bones, cleaned and white. The triple-bodied figure inside the box stared at nothing with its chipped, painted faces. On the road dust around the pole, she saw footprints. Not just one person's. Several, overlapping, bare feet, boot treads, lighter shoes. The prints led uphill, merging with the main path to the fortress. She followed them as far as the upper houses, then stopped. Standing alone in the lane, looking up at the dark mass of the fortress under the thickening clouds, she noticed something she hadn't before. There were new marks on some of the walls, small, roughly painted symbols in what looked like black spray paint. 3 overlapping circles, repeated again and again at shoulder height on corners and door frames. Hecate's sign, or someone's cheap idea of it. On one wall, the paint had run in stringy drips, like tears. By late afternoon, the clouds had dropped so low the fortress seemed to be floating in them. The wind had shifted direction. It now came from inland, smelling of wet soil and something sour. From the hostel terrace, she watched 3 figures walking up the path toward the fortress, single file. The lead one carried what looked like a bucket. The one at the back shouldered a long object wrapped in cloth. Their faces were turned away. The wind pressed their clothes flat against their bodies, but they walked steadily, as if following a groove they knew by heart. She lifted her phone to take a picture, zoomed in, and saw the last figure turn its head slightly, just enough to show a pale, sunken cheek and stringy hair blown across hollow eyes. The image shook as her pulse jumped. She lowered the phone. "You came here for hiking," she told herself. "To sleep. To stop thinking about dead people for a few days. This is not your case. These are not your patients." But the feeling in her chest was the same one she got when a supposedly stable ECG trace started to wobble. Something was sliding toward an arrhythmia. She checked her phone. No signal. Nothing. The map app showed her as a small blue dot with a question mark beside it. On impulse, she opened the camera again and filmed the path, the direction of the fortress, the darkening sky. Proof, she told herself vaguely. Proof of what exactly she couldn't say. That night, when she lay down fully dressed on the bed with a jacket over her feet, just in case, the wind had a different sound. Less random, more rhythmic, as if it were circling the village in slow, deliberate laps. Somewhere between one gust and the next, under the creaks and rattles, she thought she heard something else. A low, rough chorus, half voice, half growl, rolling up from the direction of the fortress. Dogs, she thought. Real dogs. Farm dogs. Guard dogs. But when she held her breath, she couldn't tell if there were individual barks hidden in the sound or just the wind itself, pushing past rock and ruin and the mouth of a deep, dark cistern. On the 3rd day, she stopped pretending she was going to ignore it. The sky stayed low and dirty, the wind snapping from one direction to another. The old women disappeared from the doorways. Even the cats were gone, tucked into whatever warm crevice cats knew. From the terrace, Layla watched the fortress and saw movement, small, irregular shapes moving along the wall, then vanishing. Smoke rose once, a thin grey thread quickly torn sideways by the gusts. Around midday, Nikos knocked on her door without waiting for an answer and stepped inside, closing it quickly behind him as if to keep something out. "You will leave tomorrow," he said without preamble. "The ferry will come if the weather allows." "I have a ticket for the morning after," she said. "I booked 3 nights." "You will leave tomorrow," he repeated. "If the sea says yes." He studied her face. "You've been walking around asking questions. Someone is leaving dead animals on my doorstep," she said. "You can't expect me not to ask." He exhaled through his nose, half sigh, half laugh. "You're a doctor. You think if something looks wrong you must touch it, open it, see what is inside. This is not a chest, not a pericardium. It does not need you to cut it. So I should ignore possible animal sacrifice and whatever those people are doing up there at night?" she asked. "Do you know how this looks from the outside?" He leaned against the wall, jaw clenched, then seemed to come to some decision. "There are people here," he said slowly, "who were children during the junta. They saw soldiers take men away. They saw their fathers pushed against walls. They grew up with stories of Hecate and stories of police, and they do not entirely trust either. Some of them think if they repeat certain things, in certain places, they keep worse things away." "Repeat what?" "Rituals," he said. "Words. Little dramas. Once a year. 3 times a year. It changes. It is half game, half therapy, and half stupid." He held up 3 fingers and closed them one by one. "But they won't listen to me any more. I left, worked on ships, came back. Now I'm city, like you." "Are they hurting anyone?" Layla asked. He didn't answer immediately. "They shouldn't be," he said at last. "Not anymore. Not anymore," she repeated. He looked at her, as if weighing how much she could hold. When Anna disappeared, some of them said it was a sign, a payment. Others said it was an accident lowered into a story to make it easier to tolerate. The girl's grandfather lost himself. He started going up to the fortress every dark moon, shouting into the cistern. The priests tried to make him stop. So did I. He was the one they called a cultist in the papers. And then he died, Nikos said simply. "It's not clear how. He fell. He jumped. Someone pushed him. They say they drowned him in the cistern. Maybe they did. I was away by then. So what's happening now?" He rubbed his face. "Old grief. Old superstition. People who hate that their island is a joke headline. People who would rather scare off outsiders than see Castro turned into another package holiday brochure." "And if they go too far?" she asked. His eyes flicked toward the ridge. "Then someone like you will call someone like the Coast Guard, who will call someone like the Athens papers, and we will be Cult Island again for a week." He straightened. "Stay inside tonight. If you hear things, put pillows over your ears." After he left, Layla stood in the middle of the small room, listening to the wind batter the shutters. Her muscles wanted motion. Her brain wanted data. This was how bad decisions started, with the conviction that you were the only sane person in a room full of people refusing to look directly at the problem. Around dusk, the wind dropped suddenly, as if someone had turned off a fan. The silence that followed was worse. She opened the shutters a crack and looked up toward the fortress. Lanterns moved along the wall, small yellowish lights, jerking rhythmically like a slow, uneven procession. She counted 6, maybe 7. They disappeared, one by one, down into the interior of the ruins. She checked her phone again. Still no signal. No emergency calls, no texts, nothing. "Fine," she said aloud into the empty hostel. "Fine." She put on her boots, grabbed her torch and her phone, and shrugged on her jacket. Before she could think herself out of it, she unlocked the door and stepped out into the lane. The air felt wrong. Too still, too thick. It smelled of extinguished candles and something else, an animal smell, musky and sour. She moved uphill quickly, staying close to the walls where the shadows pooled. The village was largely dark. Most shutters were closed tight. She passed the crossroads shrine and saw fresh wax dribbled down the front, still soft. Something white and soft lay at the base. Fat or organ, she couldn't tell and didn't linger to check. As she climbed, the noise from the fortress grew clearer. Voices, low and rhythmic, moving in and out of unison. A dog barked once, sharply, then again, strangled off halfway through, as if someone had clapped a hand over its muzzle. Inside the fortress walls, the air cooled abruptly. The lanterns she'd seen from below were clustered near the stairway that led down to the cistern chamber. Shadows of moving bodies flickered against the stone. She crouched behind a fragment of wall, heart pounding, and peered around it. Half a dozen people stood around the mouth of the cistern, their outlines bulky with coats and scarves. The old man with the comboloi was there, hair loose around his shoulders, lips moving in some muttered chant. The sharp-cheeked old woman stood beside him, holding a lantern high. Nikos was there too, jaw set, shoulders hunched, face harder than she'd seen it. A rope was tied around the grate's bars and looped through a makeshift pulley on a beam someone had dragged across the opening. At the end of the rope, something hung just above the grate, a shape wrapped in burlap, roughly man-sized. Ice slid down Layla's spine. She stepped out from behind the wall before her good sense could tackle her. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice sounding thin in the stone chamber. "What the hell are you doing?" All heads turned. The voices stopped. The old woman's lantern swung, throwing wild shadows. "Doctor," the old man said, "you should not be here." Nikos cursed under his breath. "I told you to stay inside," he said, as if they were having an argument in a kitchen, not at the edge of a black pit with a wrapped bundle hanging over it. "What's in the bag?" Layla demanded. "If you think I'm going to stand here and watch you reenact some news article." "It's a goat," the old woman snapped. "What else would it be?" Layla stepped closer despite herself, the beam of her torch shaking. The burlap shape twisted slightly, and she saw the outline of hooves, the bulge of horns. A dark stain had spread where the throat would be. The air was thick with the metallic smell of blood and the hot, sour reek of animal fear. "We used to take them to the butcher," one of the other men muttered. "Now he lives on the other island. It goes in here. The old place that already has too many ghosts." "This is insane," Layla said. "You're all here in the dark, chanting over a cistern, throwing animals in. You don't think this is exactly the kind of thing that—" Her words were cut off by a sudden, violent gust. The wind hit the fortress with the force of a wave. It roared down the stairwell like an animal funneled through a cage, slamming into the group around the cistern. The lantern flames stretched sideways, then blew out all at once, plunging the chamber into near black. Someone shouted. Someone else grabbed for the rope. Hands slipped. The burlap-wrapped goat swung wildly, thumping against the stone rim. One of the men stumbled backward, crashing into Layla. Her heel hit a loose rock. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing under her. The sensation was horribly familiar, that weightless instant when a body on a gurney loses its rhythm and you know, even before the alarms, that the heart has decided to stop. She flung her arms out, fingers clawing at empty air. Her torch spun away, beams slicing bizarre angles into the dark. The roar from the cistern rose, wind and voices and some low, murmuring sound from deep below. Hands closed hard around her forearm. Pain shot up to her shoulder as her fall stopped. Her feet kicked uselessly over empty space. The edge of the grate scraped her shin. "Hold her!" someone shouted. For a moment she dangled, half over the mouth of the cistern, staring down into blackness that seemed to move. The sound rising from below was not just wind. It was layered, uneven, like many whispers coming from too far away to make out. "Layla!" The word, or the idea of it, seemed to float up from the depths. For a second she heard her grandmother again, and Papadopoulos, and a third voice she still couldn't place, all braided into one. Then she was yanked sideways onto solid stone. She lay there shaking, cheek pressed against cold rock, knees pulled up. The world narrowed to the feel of rough stone under her palms and the burn in her arm where fingers still gripped too tight. Slowly, The wind's roar faded back to something ordinary. Someone relit a lantern with trembling hands. Its small yellow circle pushed back a little of the dark. The old man with the komboloi sat on the floor, breathing hard. It was his hand on her arm. Nikos crouched beside him, face pale. "You see," the old woman hissed, her voice trembling in a way that hadn't been there before. "You see what happens when outsiders interfere?" "Nothing happened," Nikos shot back. "Nothing. We almost lost her, that's all." "That's all," the woman echoed, bitter. "This is how it begins. Someone falls. Someone disappears. Then they come with cameras. With questions. Again." Layla pushed herself up to sitting. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice raw. "Really? No riddles. No stories. Just, what is this?" The old man's beads clicked softly. "It is theater," he said. "Repetition. We give something to the dark place, so it takes nothing it shouldn't. A goat, some bones, some words. The young ones like the drama. The old ones like the control." He met her eyes. "There is no cult. Only an old island that does not know what to do with its ghosts." "And the girl?" Layla asked. "Anna." He looked away. "The sea took her. Or the cliff. Or a man we never found. We put that pain into Hecate because she could hold it. Better a goddess with dogs than a neighbor with a secret." The bundle bumped against the grate again. The goat inside bleated once, weakly, and someone muttered a curse. "Enough," Nikos said. "Cut it down. It's done. No more throwing things into holes." There was an argument, low, heated, partly about tradition, partly about pride, mostly about fear of being seen as ridiculous or dangerous. In the end, the old man sliced the rope. The bundle dropped the last 20 centimeters onto the grate with a wet thud. They hauled it back onto solid stone and dragged it aside. No one looked at Layla as she stumbled up the stairs and out into the wind. By the time the ferry came the next morning, the sky had cleared. The island looked almost cheerful again, white and blue and green, the fortress just another ruin in the sun. Nikos drove her down to the port in silence. When she picked up her backpack from the truck bed, he said, "I called the police on the big island this morning. Told them about the gathering. They will come, maybe next week, maybe next month. They will look in the cistern. They will find animal bones and a story that is less interesting than the one in their heads." "And if they find more?" she asked. "Then we will know," he said, "and we will have to live with it." She thought of the whispers rising from the blackness, the way her name had seemed to float up on the wind. "I nearly fell," she said, because it felt important to say it aloud. "You didn't," he said. "You were pulled back. That is the only part that matters now." On the ferry, as the island shrank behind her, she stood at the rail and watched the fortress until it became just a darker notch on the ridge. Her phone found a signal halfway to the mainland. Messages flooded in, lab results, shift changes, a photo of her brother's toddler with chocolate on her face. She opened the camera app. The video she'd taken of the lanterns moving along the fortress wall played in her hand. In the recording, the wind noise oversaturated the microphone, an ugly roar. The tiny lights bobbed, then disappeared one by one. When she scrubbed through frame by frame, she caught the moment where she'd thought she'd seen a pale, hollow-cheeked face. On the tiny screen, it was nothing more than a blur of light and shadow. 2 weeks later, back in Thessaloniki, she sat in the hospital break room at 3 in the morning, drinking coffee that tasted like cardboard. The TV in the corner played silently, showing a panel discussion about some scandal. Her phone buzzed with a news notification. She glanced down. Local police investigate cult claims on remote island. The headline read. Below, a photo of Castro's fortress in nice evening light. The article was short. Anonymous tips about animal sacrifice, odd symbols, a troubled history, the disappearance of a child decades ago. Police had inspected the cistern and found old animal remains and fragmentary human bones likely dating from the 1970s. No foul play could be confirmed or ruled out. The investigation was ongoing. At the bottom of the piece, a quote from an unnamed resident. The wind here makes people hear things. We don't need outsiders telling us which ghosts are real. She locked her phone, slid it back into her pocket, and went to see her next patient. A middle-aged man with chest pain stared at her like she was the only thing holding his world together. That night, when she finally went home and fell into bed, she dreamed again of corridors under stone and a breath at her ear. In the morning, bleary-eyed and late for her shift, she opened her apartment door and nearly stepped on it. A small dish sat neatly on the mat. Not clay, cheap white ceramic, the kind from discount stores. On it lay 3 chicken hearts, small and dark, each resting in a neat pinch of salt. Her hallway window was closed. The building door downstairs had a working intercom. Someone, at some point during the night, had gotten in. Or someone on her floor had decided this was a good joke. She stood there for a long moment, listening. No wind, just city traffic and a distant siren. No dogs. It's an idiot neighbor, she said aloud, saying it made it more plausible. She picked up the dish carefully and carried it to the sink. For a second she considered throwing it straight into the trash. Instead, she turned on the tap, washed the hearts down the drain one by one, and then, after a moment's hesitation, set the empty dish on the windowsill outside her kitchen, where the city air could dry it. When she closed the window, a tiny draught curled past her cheek from the frame gap, cool and insistent. It smelled of exhaust and coffee and something almost, but not quite, like sea salt.